Market Musings podcast with Fairbairn and Russell. Hello and welcome to the Market Musings podcast, where today our guest, Dr. Allan Syms, the Executive Chairman of Cizzle Biotech, is joining us. We're very pleased to be talking to you, Allan, today on the podcast. Of course, we did a little introduction interview a week or so ago, getting an idea of what the company is all about and what you're developing. But of course, on this podcast, we take the approach. It is Friday, after all, so we can. It's probably not so early for Kenny to be opening the beers up in Scotland. A little bit early for me, but we'll take a more relaxed approach on this podcast and really get to know you and some of the other people behind the business. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Well, glad to be here. It's actually been a very hectic few weeks, really. Been traveling in the United States, meeting our American partners, Core Path Laboratories. That was very exciting in terms of the developments there. And London's been busy with a healthcare conference this week as well. So I've actually been out and about quite a bit, meeting many other sort of comrades in the field of how to defeat cancer. So so we were out and about. So it's been a very busy week. So glad to have a few minutes to talk to you guys.
Yeah, very good. Well, look forward to catching up on all that's been going on then. And of course, Kenny, how are you doing?
Yep, I'm really good, Mark. Thanks for asking, and great to have you on, Alan. I'm just looking out the window here, and it almost feels like it's getting dark already in Scotland. I can't believe how quickly the years went. We're in the middle of November, and Christmas is not far away. So, no, it's good to be here that you're travelling, and obviously, we're going to speak a lot about the company, and give us a high level overview and really sort of roadmap for next year. But the point of this podcast, Alan, is really I like to get directors on and just sort of strip them back and almost do like a plotted history of yourself. You can go back as far as you want, whether it's go back to your childhood, education, university, first job, successes and failures in your career. And I always say I want to hear about failures because I've had plenty in my life, and that's where you learn the most. Usually you kind of hide for about a year, and then you come back and say, right, how am I going to fix this? And that's part of the journey. So, and I think investors also like to know about the people behind the company, because there's no point in having the best projects in the world or the best research programs in the world if we don't have the people to manage them. So it's really an opportunity just to give us 10, 15 minutes and just take us back as far as you want. And the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, to start with, let me just totally agree with what you just said about get to know the people, because at least for a short part of my career, I was actually sitting on the other side of the investment fence and worked for a private VC and also a government VC. I was actually working for the Welsh government at the time, running a special high-tech venture fund for them. And during my period, I learned a lot about venture capital. And one of the messages I always have remembered and thought about, and it is relevant to today's podcast, which is there are 5 rules for looking at why you might invest in a business. And the first is be absolutely clear about what the need is. Why is there a problem? What is it that you're trying to solve? Why is nobody else solving this problem? And if it's so important that there's no way to do it, then it's a really important problem. And of course, in our case, solving the early detection of cancer, we think, is a very important problem. And then the second one is, do you have a solution? Is it unique? Is it practical? Can it actually really work? Does it solve the solution? And then thirdly, it's the people. And fourthly, it's the people. And fifthly, it's the people. And that's what he told me, which is really, at the end of the day, the thing that gets the greatest highlight is the people, because wrong people can take a great idea and ruin it. And so right people is what you need for the right opportunity, for the right solution. So I think you're absolutely right. So I'm very happy to sort of reveal the true Allan Syms, if you want, the guy behind who's commercializing Cizzle Biotechnology. And I was thinking a little bit about this before the podcast and thinking about, well, I'm not sure everybody really wants to hear about what happened when I was first born and totally all my childhood. But more what were the things that early on made a difference to me? And I think the word for this podcast probably is motivation, which is, what drives an individual. If we've agreed that people are, if not the most important thing, certainly very important in the equation of success, is what is it that drives somebody? What's their motivation for doing something? And I was trying to think back to the earliest part of my childhood when I actually felt what was that motivating moment in my life, and it really sort of goes back to, in fact, those school days. And so in many ways, having said I don't want to give you a potted history from my birth and onwards, it is the first time I really felt what the word motivation might have meant to me. And certainly, at school, it was a very average school. I think I was a very average student, to be honest. But in many ways, there was not a great deal of what I would call motivation in wanting to be there. There was school had its challenges. It was in a fairly sort of economically deprived area, and a lot of the people didn't want to be there, quite frankly. And so the theme at the school was, if you could get away by not going, then don't go. And so actually, for quite a lot of my childhood, I followed suit, which is, if I could find a reason not to be at school, I'd pay hooky and I wouldn't be there. And so that was really heading me towards not particularly great career. And in fact, actually, there weren't great opportunities. I mean, most of the people, I was brought up in an outlying area of Portsmouth, and a lot of people joined the Navy, a lot of people joined the military, a lot of people went into light engineering, or worked for some of the services, such as the post office or whatever. But one way or the other is, the idea of one day being an executive chairman of an important cancer diagnostics business would not have been in my mind, and I dare say not in the teachers. And I think it was, I don't know, one day I just felt that I was doing okay, but what happened? What would happen if I actually did go 5 days a week, just for a little while, just to see what might happen? And I was amazed, because actually my grades improved and I improved. And then suddenly I realized what learning was about. And I became motivated. Motivated because actually I wanted to do better. And why did I want to do better? Well, because, this big thing in life about, everybody says, well, it's really good to give rather than to receive. But actually, all of us, if we're really truthful, even if we are that giving sort of person, we do so because we quite like to receive a good feeling inside. Not that somebody has to thank us, but there is this good feeling inside you that says, I've achieved something. I've done something important. I've achieved something. And I think the only reason I've taken time to set that scene is because once I had felt that feeling of achievement, of succeeding in even a little bit improving my grades, and it's a message I give to all young people today is, if you're struggling, then just keep at it, because there is always an achievement you're going to get. You may not be one day the most successful academic or industrialist in the world, but you are going to improve. And as you improve in life, so you will start feeling better inside about your achievements. And that is where motivation comes from. So, I mean, that I wanted to start this sort of podcast really about, and I'll spend less time on that sort of thing as we go forward, but it was the hallmark of something that said, you know what, when I get up in the morning, I'm motivated because I've learned something new. I've done something different. I've improved something that I was working on. I'm doing something that's important for other people. I'm doing something that makes a difference to the world, and I'm changing something. And so as a consequence, that really set me on my journey. And I think that may be a break if you want to cut in with something else, but then I'll tell you where that journey took me.
Well, I mean, that's it's a nice little introduction there. I think that's very all part of this podcast is understanding the people behind the business and of course the motivations. I find it very interesting that you took that decision to say, well, let's try 5 days a week at school and see what difference it makes. I mean, I had a similar situation. I despised mathematics. I was awful at it. And the teachers weren't that great either. I was in a lot of the lower groups at school for mathematics, and my parents got me an outside a private tutor. So even in the evenings at home, when I wanted to be doing other things, I was having extra math lessons, and I didn't like it, and I didn't look at the guy, and I kept my head down. And my dad just said to me once, "Look, just try." Just because he went to the garage and he saw me through the window, and he said, just at least engage with the man, at least look him in the eye, you know. And you know what? And I did that, and I took that on board, and I completely changed everything. And I started to get better at maths, and I rapidly moved up the sets in school, and I managed to scrape the C grade, which no one would ever have expected me to do that. So I think you've got to find. Try these things, like you say, and you're seeing the results, and fantastic. And it's a great feeling, like you say, to feel that you've achieved something or you're getting better at it. But you do have to, take that decision to actually try it. And even if it doesn't work out, at least you had a go at it. So I think that's a great way to start talking.
Yes, it is, and so, and it's the learning process, and for me, and I could have gone several routes. I mean, I was quite interested in art and graphic design, but actually, I found the sciences of great interest. The idea that there is there are these life forms that inhabit this planet of ours, and where do the trees come from, and where are the insects from, and most importantly, perhaps I argue, where do humans come from, and why do we have 5 fingers, and why are we a certain height, and why does our nose stop growing at a certain point, and why, all the things about isn't it incredible how a being is conceived from 2 simple small cells and becomes this amazing complex thing which can do so many things, and mostly we would hope for good, but we know not always. But this complex thing with thought and feelings and the ability to innovate and do things, that the science behind the creation of life and how it gets where it gets just totally fascinated me. And so I was really interested, and therefore I studied hard at that, went through a degree, and eventually had a PhD. And the PhD was really, and I never got to the answer of all the questions I wanted about how we get there, because I got distracted en route. And the distraction en route was, well, this is all fantastic when it turns out to be good, but this blueprint for life isn't exactly infallible. And we get diseased. And the particular disease state that I found particularly sort of heartbreaking in many ways was the area of cancer, which is that many people, when you talk to them, it's one of the most fearful things that anybody thinks they might get. I mean, it eats away at the family, it eats away at everybody's ability to function normally. And the idea that, there could be a very sad outcome of it causes you to wonder why. Why does this wonderful blueprint of life have this fault in it? How does it suddenly go wrong? What goes wrong? Where does it go wrong? And can you put it right? And so that's why I really got into the deep, deep science, and got to the point where I started to understand a bit more about how cancer is created. And if I could understand how cancer is caused, then perhaps I could do something about fixing it. I was pretty much dedicated to what can I do to help people. That was my prime goal in those early years: understand the disease and try and sort it out.
Okay. And this interest came about sort of when? Latter school years, would you say?
Yes, well, I'd been to school, and then went on, did a degree in biochemistry, and then from biochemistry went and did a PhD in cancer research.
Okay. What was your your thesis in your PhD?
Well, it was actually understanding one of the biggest killers in cancer research, which was prostate cancer. And many men today still do, unfortunately, contract or get prostate cancer, and some die of it, and quite a few die of it. So it is one of the big cancers, and I really wanted to understand a bit more about why that particular cancer does the damage that it does to people. And that took me on to really understanding the broader issues of cell biology, and understanding what's going on in our cells and in our bodies, as to what can we do about that.
Okay.
So when was the jump into industry, Alan? I mean, obviously,
Well,
you
it's
must have spent.
it's a great question, because I thought, to be honest, I was going to be a career-long academic. I was interested in the causal reasons of disease. I was interested in the science and the biology of how to fix these things, and I did sort of think I was probably going to do that for the rest of my life. And I completed my PhD, and then just decided to jump on a plane. I'd never been to the United States before, but there was an opportunity to go and work in Texas at Baylor College of Medicine and the University of Texas. And they felt they wanted this young Brit to go and work with them. So I just jumped on a plane and went out there for 3 years and lived in Texas, and I enjoyed that. And I was a fairly productive academic and produced quite a number of papers understanding how cells function, and understanding the mechanisms by which they don't function well. And so I thought that was great. And then I came back because my wife and I had a child at that time, and we thought we should really bring our young baby back to be with the wider family, and to grow up as a Brit rather than perhaps a Texan, although she is an honorary Texan, and I think it's in her DNA because she loves country and western and line dancing. So somehow, I think, having been born there, she's still got Texas somewhere in the core of her body. But no, we came back, and I took a further postdoc at the University of Oxford. And so in many ways, I felt like I was now operating in some of the best academic institutions in the world, focused on cancer research, focused on understanding what's going on and what's not going on with cells. And then I realized, as good as I was, and I thought I wasn't bad, by the way, because I was fairly confident about the things I did. I'd sort of become a lot more confident as I'd gone through the years, which comes from greater knowledge. The more knowledge you have, the greater you can feel confident about talking about it. But I'd reached a point where I thought, I don't think I'm a bad scientist, and maybe quite a good scientist, but there are lots of great scientists out there. And I asked myself the fundamental question: what was the probability that any of my research was ultimately going to help any human being? And if you recall, that's really why I got into this, which was I was interested in being able to help somebody, make a difference to somebody's life, and maybe solve the problems associated with people getting cancer. And I thought, actually, my odds of my specific piece of research actually making that difference weren't particularly high, because the process of commercialization from a concept to take it into becoming a treatment, maybe a drug or some other means of helping somebody, has to go through years and years and years of commercial research, clinical trials. And I thought, I'm not sure that I'm actually going to be the person that comes up with the thing that's going to save somebody's life. But there are thousands of scientists out there that might be. And so wouldn't it be perhaps a better use of my time to actually try to look about how I could help other scientists take their ideas and help them commercialize it? So I'm not now just working off my science, I'm working on hundreds of scientists' research with the view of trying to select out those things that might make the biggest difference and be much more on the applied end of life. And so I actually decided to give up academia. And at that time, it was really frowned upon. And so I was told that I'd sold my soul to the devil, and joined those industrialists and did it for coin. And the reality is, why I did it was I wanted to actually be on the applied end of life and actually bring great science to market. I wanted to be a translational scientist, and really make these things available to help people.
Yeah, you wanted to drive the bus rather than be a passenger on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that time, and I realized I was naive in the commercial world, and so I figured I'd better start learning all over again. And one of the best places, and I was actually at Birkbeck College this week talking to a lot of graduate students, MScs and PhDs, thinking again the same thing. How do I move into the commercial world? And I was trying to give them my view, my journey in particular was I went and joined a corporate. And the reason why I did that is that corporate entities, you may like them or you may dislike them, but one of the things that they do invest in is people. Started off our podcast with the value of people. And certainly I joined what was then called Amersham International, then became GE Healthcare. And they invest a lot in their people, and they really do put training there, and they give you the experience of what it is like to operate and be productive within an environment that's very hard commercial. Yeah, you have to make profit, you have to make sales, you have to make something that somebody needs. But to me, that was the tick in the box, because if you can't provide it to somebody, then how can you help them? And so my view was, here's a great organization that really helped train me about what is marketing, what is a business plan, how do you read a spreadsheet, what is the view of how you take something very early on in development, and what do you have to do to harden it and ruggedize it so that it's commercially available, and it works reliably, and it works every time. And so, I still say that is a really good career path for people, is go and work hard within a good corporate environment and learn the ropes of what it is to actually bring something to market. And I did that for a number of years, and then felt, right, I now need to up the game. I now need to become far more engaged at what I would call the coalface of the early stage transfer of technology out of universities and academic research institutes, and give them their first steps on the journey towards that being a commercial product. So very early stage businesses, which are conceptual, there'd probably be great science behind them, but they don't particularly have any money. They don't have a management team in place. They don't have anything in place. In fact, actually, these are the first baby steps of taking something. And some might argue that's the most challenging area to be in, because getting the right people, if you haven't got any money, is a bit difficult. And if you haven't got the right people, you can't get the money. And so it's a catch-22 situation of, how do you actually invest your time and effort to get the thing moving, so that you can make it a commercially interesting and viable success? And so after my corporate training, I then embarked on my career really as an early stage business builder within high-tech businesses.
Okay. And you say that working for a big corporate, they do invest in people for sure. But what is it like working for, what you say, Big Pharma? Can you give a kind of a snapshot of what it's like? Because it's this sort of, people would say they're sort of, they're bad companies, all about profiteering on people's needs of health. But maybe you can shed some light on your experience of working for these companies, considering as well your clear moral motivations, which is helping people. You've said it a number of times.
I think probably the first thing I realized was how competitive it was. There's a lot of people competing to move up the step ladder of success within a corporate. So it's very competitive, and you need to be able to achieve within a competitive environment. So yes, it was competitive. I'm not saying it's harder work, because I think academics work ridiculous hours, that suits themselves. But and particularly, I would say, even within the corporate life, lots of people work hours. I mean, there's no 9 to 5 job that I've ever been in. I mean, mine is a 24/7, and if necessary, it's on your public holidays or whatever you'll need it. So it's very rare to have any sort of rigidity around it. So you work hard, but you also meet similar-minded people. Actually, you meet lots of people who actually are there because they want to bring something new into the marketplace, and they get a great deal of pride in doing it. But the company also, as I said, they did invest in me, and they actually initiated my journey into a company-paid MBA, which, to be honest, that is a very expensive thing for them to do, because they are distracting my time, they're paying out money, and they're investing, therefore, that they will get a return on that in terms of me being a better employee and better able to contribute to their success story. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, there are some rigidities in that. Academia has a lot of freedom. There are a lot more controls, I would say, around what you can do and what you can't do. But I think that's fine because those are the learning lessons you need. You need that sort of level of um, control and expectation about planning, and you will get pulled up on it if you fail.
Mm.
So it is competitive, it's hard work, but for me, I think a really good lesson for everybody. So I enjoyed it very much.
And given
Yeah.
your,
I mean,
sorry, can I just ask a quick
Yep.
question? Given your background in science and your qualifications in science, but also the experience from the corporate side there, where would you say you fit? Would you say you're more a scientist or more a businessman, or are you sort of 50-50 on both? What do you think?
Yes, great question. I don't think I'm an academic anymore because I'm
Okay.
just doing cutting edge research anymore. And I think, to do that, you need to be pretty much full time in doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I know enough to be dangerous, I suppose, which is always it's always a challenge. But I think the area of translational science, the idea of moving it from a lab into being something commercial,
Mm.
is fraught with its own unique problems. And it's a bit like, if you're an academic who's worked very hard on something, you've got something precious you've spent your time and effort on. You've put your reputation to it. And so, it's an old cliche, but it's your baby. And the commercial people get hold of your nice, new, fresh baby, and then they start dressing it in the clothes you don't like. Or some other commercial nasty person says your baby's ugly, then you stop looking at it in the way that perhaps you might, which is that it is possible that the baby's ugly, and it is possible that the clothes you'd like it to wear aren't the right clothes. And so commercial people can be pretty direct and pretty cruel about the way in which they think that baby should grow up, and it doesn't always fit with what the academic would like and prefer. And so as a consequence of that, unless you have somebody that understands why they feel like they do, can understand why their science was behind driving this new creation in the way that it should be, then it's very difficult for you to make it work because you can't communicate. So if there is ever another word that was important other than motivation today, it's communication.
Mm-hmm.
Which is that the ability to communicate with an academic on an academic basis and understand and have the respect of an academic that you also know what's behind the science gives you credibility that they think you will do the best you can to help bring their view of what's important to the marketplace. But equally well, you have to have the hard inner core of the reality of what it takes to bring something to that marketplace. And you have to have the ability to communicate that to your investors, to your shareholders, to your partners, and all your stakeholders that will one day hopefully use this great new invention that's become something as a new product. And so I think I straddle both fields, and in many ways, that's a very hard thing to do. And there are very many successful people who've done it, but I think we still are probably in a minority overall. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something I love doing.
Yeah, yeah. You probably find your head's in one field and your heart's in another field. Yeah,
Could
I
be.
think that's
Could be.
yeah. Just
I still spend Sunday nights reading academic research papers, which people might say that's a bit weird, but I quite enjoy doing it.
good, good. Just before we go into Cizzle, Alan, just stepping back and having a sort of helicopter look at your career. I mean, it sounds like you've had a successful career both in academic and corporate and commercial. There must be a failure in there, Alan. I always like to drop it into the conversation, just because
there are lots of failures, but I never see a failure as a failure. I see it as a learning exercise.
Yeah.
But I sort of mentioned to you that I position myself as wanting to be this translational scientist, and I've been involved in spinning university startups up now for the best part of 30 years, and they don't always become successful.
Yeah.
And these businesses have been spun out of great universities like the University of Manchester, UCL in London. I was involved in a very young enterprise out of Nottingham, one in Aberdeen, and they're not always successful. But I have to tell you, my greatest, I would say, journey into oblivion was actually getting involved in an ice cream and yogurt manufacturing business, which you would say, why on earth did you do that? And I have to say, I did it because of friendship, and I did it because I thought I could make a difference, and also because it wasn't an ordinary ice cream and yogurt manufacturing business. It was a sort of a health foodie one. In other words, it was to do with soya in its very early days and its ability to lower cholesterol. And so I felt justified that it wasn't just because I was going to go and make some ice cream and yogurts. But what I realized very early on is that I knew nothing about making yogurt and I knew nothing about making ice cream. And the lesson I probably learned was don't play around with things you haven't got a clue about, because you're probably not going to understand it enough, and therefore you'll probably fail at it. And unfortunately, it did fail for lots of reasons. But nonetheless, the big lesson I learned was stay where you know. By all means, play on the periphery of that. But it's really quite a good idea to actually utilize the strength that you have built up over all these years and all the knowledge and all you've learned, and apply your efforts to that, because that is where you've got the greatest chance of success. So anyway, I wasn't very good at making ice cream and yogurts. So.
That's good. At least you're honest. We always like to ask, because you get some weird and wonderful stories, and that's quite nice that it was completely different, but there was still want to help people element in the business as well. So
yeah,
that was great. So just before we come on to Cizzle, can you maybe just give us the journey to Cizzle, how you became involved with the company?
Yes. I mean, my journey throughout these early stage starts was varied in that, some of these university spin-outs went on and became listed vehicles, went through an IPO. Some were trade sales, some just petered out, never really worked. But at least I had sort of an experience of what it was like to deal with a very early stage business. And Cizzle Biotechnology was itself a university spin-out. It was spun out of the University of York after years of diligent and exciting research by Professor Dawn Coverley, and spent a great deal of her life understanding what's happening at the cellular level, what causes cells to divide, what regulates their building blocks of life called DNA. What is it that controls that to replicate at the right time? And so she was studying a gene which was called CIZ1. So hence the name of our company, Cizzle Biotechnology. It comes from the study of this very important normal functioning gene in cells that regulates the way in which their DNA divides and the way in which it actually causes the cell to divide. And she spun that business out herself and took it to a certain point and then really ran out of money. And so what it really needed was a cash injection. And so it became dormant for a few years because, believe it or not, it's very difficult to raise money for early stage businesses. And she's a full-time academic. And so you really needed somebody on board who was focused on building a business. And I had been approached because I'd had experience in taking these companies all the way through their journey through to exit. I'd been approached by a cash shell. Now, for those who don't know, a cash shell is a business that already exists, and it may have been doing something else, but all of those assets have gone, and the only thing that's left in the business is cash. Hence, it's a cash shell.
Yep.
And I was asked by the owners of that business to become its chairman and identify something for them to buy. And they had an idea that they wanted to be in healthcare. And given my background, was really the question of could we identify something in the healthcare area and navigate a position to purchase that business and do what effectively is a reverse takeover, because you're probably going to end up buying something that's a lot more valuable than the cash in the bank. And so in reality, whatever you buy, those people that own that will end up owning the cash shell. And that's exactly what we did with Cizzle Biotechnology. So we did effectively a reverse takeover of Cizzle Biotechnology Limited, reversed it into our cash shell, and then we went and raised 2.2 million back in May 2021, and we came to the London stock market on the main list at that time. And so we are now a public company looking at the way in which CIS1 is relevant to cancer diagnostics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the reverse takeovers, it's quite common, especially in this cycle in the markets. Usually in the downturns, you find there's a lot of cash shells available because they've run out of money. Their share prices, well, not run out of money. They've got some money, but the projects are pretty much gone. So it is, you say, a shell. So
yeah,
all right. So I'm a new investor. I'm not really in the pharma field. I'm more sort of mining stocks. That's my kind of sector. But if I was a new investor, can you give me and our listeners as well a sort of a high level overview? What the investment opportunity is within the business. What is the core element of the business?
Well, I think let's start off from why did I want to get involved in this? Well, it is cancer. It is an area which I've spent a great deal of my life specializing in. I think it's important, but this area is lung cancer, and lung cancer is the biggest killer of all the cancers. And there's a reason for that, which is that I like to call it the silent killer, because you don't know that you have it until it's quite advanced. The symptomatic part of that disease is that maybe you've had a cough that won't go away. Maybe you've coughed up some blood. Maybe you've had breathing difficulties. But in all likelihood, if you've got those symptoms, then the disease is already advanced. And survival rates with detecting cancer early versus detecting it late are very variable. So if you are a person that has been diagnosed with lung cancer at stage 1, then you've got 80-90% chance of surviving that. If you are diagnosed at stage 4, when it's very symptomatic, then unfortunately your survival rate drops off a cliff and you may only have 5 to 10% chance of surviving that over a 5-year period. So it is absolutely vital to detect lung cancer, and for that matter, many other cancers, at the earliest possible stage you can. And for lung cancer, there isn't really a very good test. In fact, there is no test. There's no simple blood test you can take. In fact, the only way that anybody knows they've got a stage 1 lung cancer is really by imaging. That's really by sort of X-ray followed by CT scanning. And the problem with CT scanning is that it's not very accurate in detecting stage 1 lung cancer. In fact, you can get it wrong up to 90% of the time, which means that even if you do have a small lung nodule that's been picked up, probably by accident, maybe you've gone in hospital for a CT scan for some other reason, because it's not symptomatic at that stage. You've not gone there because you think you have lung cancer. It's for some other reason. But if you see a nodule, you have to absolutely treat that as a potential cancer. And so it's quite right to then submit all those people to further diagnostics. But the problem is, if 9 out of 10 of those people don't really have it, then you are tying up an awful lot of hospital resource. People are having to go back for their scans multiple times when actually they didn't need to. You're tying up doctors' time. And of course, we all know the NHS, and for that matter, health providers around the world are strapped with their budget. And so really, anything you can do to prevent wastage of resource is absolutely critical. So if there was a test that could determine whether or not you had stage 1 lung cancer at the very earliest point, that would be enormously valuable. Well, thanks to Professor Coverley and her work and looking at the CIS1 gene in our building blocks, she happened across a variant of that. And this is because the DNA that makes the protein, there is some error in the way in which that protein has been compiled or put together. It's sort of a result of a misreading or bits of the RNA that comes from DNA. And I'm sorry to be a bit technical there, but this is the way in which biologists would speak, is that there are errors of missing parts of that protein, which mean that you have an aberrant protein. And that protein is called Cis1b. And it turns out that Cis1b is excreted into the blood and is highly associated with early stage lung cancer. So, in fact, her early work in terms of developing a prototype cancer test showed that this test has a sensitivity of 95%. That means we're capturing 95 out of 100 people correctly with stage 1 lung cancer. This is such an incredible breakthrough in the field of cancer diagnostics, because for the first time, we've got a really, really reliable test that can be done almost in a finger prick of blood that says somebody does or does not have an early stage lung cancer. Now, to put that into perspective, and I was in the States. I mean, in the United States, nearly 250,000 people get diagnosed with lung cancer every single year. And unfortunately, about 130,000 people die. But those 250,000 people that get diagnosed are most likely to be diagnosed at a later stage, because that's the reason why they're there being tested, because they've got symptoms.
Yeah.
In which case, and it does sound a bit like scaremongering, I hate to scaremonger, but how many people are walking around today with stage 1 lung cancer and just don't know it? That at the very time when you can make a big difference to them and save their lives, they don't know it. And there is no test available that you can tell them that. That's the huge problem that I was talking about. And here we are with Cizzle Biotechnology, where there is this protein that we can measure in the blood very simply that can tell us that. We have that answer. And so for me, Cizzle Biotechnology is an absolute platform company for changing the face under which we are going to do cancer diagnostics. And just to extend that story, is I've told you the way in which we can help those people that have been falsely diagnosed. But the real goal of the company has to be as a general screening tool that says, listen, we can test large populations of people looking for that protein, much the same way, as you might say, well, think about COVID testing or pregnancy testing in those little white sticks that we have. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could have that in a doctor's office, and as part of your well person check, go along and have a quick test to see if you've got stage 1 lung cancer? That to me is the golden opportunity.
Yeah, it's not as if we're not used to testing. We've just done 2.5 years of it with COVID, so everybody is in the test zone. So it's not something like, something new, something people are going to
exactly.
obstacle to. It should be. It should be. If it's commercially available off the shelf or in the doctors or whatever, it should be something you just do as part of your well-man or well-woman checkup or something.
Exactly. I also want to just sort of say, look, that's the vision. It's a very difficult task to go from what has been developed in the lab to making that available generally to the public. Lots and lots of things we need to do. Yeah, it is a very good question, because that's why we need money to develop the test. And we don't do that on our own. We do that with partnerships. And I mentioned that I'd been to the States last week, and that's because we've signed up a US pathology group who specialize in oncology testing. They provide cancer testing and other services across 22 states in the USA. They get it. They totally understand why this is so important, and they will be our partners to commercialize this. They are developing that as a laboratory test in their laboratories so that they can provide that service across half the United States. We have a similar arrangement in China, where we're working with the leading scientists at the top oncology hospitals to do exactly the same thing. And in China, in a much bigger country, but a real challenge, because much of the country still has quite undeveloped healthcare systems. And I remember speaking to Minister of Health, who said he was concerned that the country was facing a tsunami of lung cancer. That to them was not something that they really wanted. And so early testing was so important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is key, isn't it? It's always the early detection of cancer, and how fantastic would it be to have a simple test like we do for COVID to detect for lung cancer there. And as you say, you came to the market, you raised 2 million. The difficult task is getting it to a marketable product, but you're on the markets where the capital is hopefully available, and you've got those two partnerships there in the United States and China. Before we, I think, finish off with kind of the key milestones, let's say, or the pathway, the roadmap, what's to come, how you do plan to get this to a finished marketable product. I do just want to play devil's advocate just a tiny little bit, and just thinking of a story. I think it was Theranos, that huge story.
Yes,
and I'm not. Please do not take this the wrong way, but that was marketed as a simple blood test, wasn't it? And of course, I don't actually know the full story, but it turned out it wasn't actually what it was, and it was more of a pulling the wool over your eyes, and that kind of phrase is too good to be true. Now, I obviously know that you've explained there that Professor Coverley has been working on this for a long time from University of York. So there's a lot of years and years and years of research that's gone into it. But I mean, how realistic is this, do you think, Allan, to have a simple blood test from your point of view? And what would you say to investors who are perhaps a little bit skeptical?
Well, first off, let's try to just understand what happened with the Theranos case and Elizabeth Holmes, who was the young CEO that led that. What they were claiming was that from a single drop of blood, you could actually diagnose 50 different types of diseases.
Okay.
And that is not what we're saying. We are looking for a specific single test, single protein that we know a lot about. So we know a specific protein that we can extract from the blood. We could sequence that protein. We know what the sequence of it is. We know that the way you detect these very specifically is you make antibodies against that protein. And for listeners who perhaps don't know what antibodies are, they are the body's natural defense mechanism against viruses. It's antibodies that you get, you make against things like COVID. They are the things that vaccines cause your body to make. So they're very highly specific, targeted proteins that bind to these biomarkers, as we call them. That's very different than what Theranos was doing. So actually, probably not the great example to compare us with. It's probably better to think about other businesses that have got diagnostic ambitions, but don't have such a simple targeted protein as we have. And they are the ones that are going to struggle. So if you're trying to put together multiple markers, and in fact, there are large companies that you could say are trying to do many, many types of disease. There's a company called Grail. Grail is looking at the genome, looking at genomic markers, and they are looking at many different types of cancers. And they were, in fact, the biggest ever life science spin out. They were spun out of a company called Illumina, with almost $1 billion in cash. And today they're worth something like $15 to $20 billion. They are, if you like, the other end of the spectrum of a fantastic success story for looking at multiple disease states or multiple markers of disease states. And, there's plenty in between. And I think we are not like either of those. We're in the middle of being a company that has a very specific protein. We have very specific antibodies that recognize that protein and very tried and trusted methodology to detect that protein using these antibodies. So our journey has actually been trodden many, many times in the past. We are only following the footsteps of many other companies that have developed these types of assays. So we are not having to reinvent the wheel at every single stage of the journey. The key for us is to have knowledge of the protein, which we have, and that comes from Professor Coverley's work. The second thing we have is very clear antibodies, and we've identified, and that's part of the intellectual property of the company, antibodies that can detect that protein very specifically. And now all we're doing is using everybody else's techniques and technologies to make that into a commercial test. And our journey is progressing well because we do have those antibodies, and we are in the process of optimizing those tests. And we will soon be sharing that information with our partners so that they can start to develop the commercial tests in their laboratory. So we're looking for a very exciting 2023.
Excellent. Okay, that sounds good. So, exciting 2023. Do you want to take us through some of the key milestones that you're looking for as a company?
I think the first thing we want to do is obviously complete the lab development work on the test.
Mm-hmm.
That is really what I call hardening the test to ensure that the reagents are stable, that you can scale those reagents up. We have developer companies that work with us. We're fairly virtual. Everything we do is contracted out. So we contract out development, we contract out manufacture. And one of the key things that we will do is contract some further clinical trials. And so these are not large trials for us. They're fairly small confirmatory trials. We'll do those in the USA and we'll do those in China as well. So milestones are complete the development work, complete the scale up and production, complete the sort of the quality assurance and QC parts to make sure we've got a rugged, reliable test that can work every time. Ensure we've done the right sort of clinical trials for that. And then there's this important step, which is accreditation or approval of a test. And by that, I mean is that many people are familiar with the very health regulatory boards. The most famous probably in the USA is the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. They approve kits in the States, but there's also another mechanism in the States called the LDT test, which is a laboratory development test. And that is done through the accreditations that are awarded to our partner companies like Corpath Laboratories. So they are an accredited laboratory, and they can accredit the tests to be an LDT. Excuse me. So I think the key milestones for us are to give them a product that they can use in anger, for them to complete their clinical trials, and then they will be able to start marketing the test on our behalf in the United States. And then, we do the same in China.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly the same thing. And they will obviously use that on people who are from China. We don't think there's any difference between people who come from China or people from the States or people from Europe, but you've got to test it. So we will do that. And then once we've done that, so we actually become commercial, then we'll start looking at how we can develop this into a doctor's office test. Because this first test is for hospitals and laboratories. And then beyond that, we want to then start looking at the way in which we can roll this out to be much more of a useful screening tool. And that's very important, not just because of the size of the market, which is very large indeed. The Chinese have reported that they think their market is 30 million tests a year. And they were quoting that they think they can sell the test for $100 a test. So that is an enormous market for us to be attacking. But just recently, the UK National Screening Committee reported that they had changed their recommendations on screening. It might surprise people, but until a few months ago, there was not a recommendation to screen anybody for lung cancer. And the reason being is the health economics. It's too expensive, not reliable enough. And so some enormous trials were done to see if there was a way to improve the health economics of that. And those studies were complete using what's known as low-dose CT scanning. And the results of that say that now actually is viable. And so a new lung cancer screening program will be introduced in the UK, which is absolutely great news. And our goal is to be involved in any way which we can to help support a screening program, not just here but all over the world. And then obviously on that point is the fact that the world is bigger than the UK, the USA, and China. Lung cancer is a global problem, and then we can really get on with making sure that we make this test available to everyone.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Allan Syms, for your time today. Kenny, do you have any final questions for Allan, or are we good?
No, I think we're good. I was quite happy just to sit and listen to that roadmap there. That sounds very, very exciting and almost on the cusp of great things. So we'll pay attention to what's going on, Alan, and we'll no doubt have you back on Stockbox at some point very soon. But no, it's been fantastic hearing your whole sort of life journey and how you've ended up at Cizzle. And we've kept it under an hour, so that's all good. That's always a bonus.
Brilliant.
So
Indeed. Well, thank you very much again, Allan, and we'll be keeping in touch, I'm sure, following the developments at Cizzle Biotech. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for listening. I love to tell the story because it's so important, and hopefully your listeners have found it interesting too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another podcast from Market Musings with Fairbairn and Russell. Tune in next time.